My name's Colleen Spees, and I am just thrilled to be here today. First, I want to wish everyone a happy National Donut Day. Fact. Us dietitians call that job security. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about prevention. I'm going to talk about lifestyle behaviors, modifiable lifestyle behaviors, and I want to give kudos to my student Emily Hill, who talked to you about our Garden of Hope. So you're going to have a little bit more of that as well. So let's get going. So how did I get here? This is actually a pedigree of my family. I come from a family affected by Li-Fraumeni. That's me, the little circle there on your right-hand side, and that's my picture. Our proband is my sister. Now, Jennifer Aniston is not, in fact, my biological sister, but every time I talk, my sister hates the pictures I use of her, so I decided I'd use Jennifer Aniston this time. So my sister is the proband, not Jennifer Aniston. We don't want to read that on the news tonight. Okay. So I'm a registered dietitian. I have a master's degree in exercise science, and I've always been a firm believer in modifiable lifestyle behaviors. And in 2007, my sister was the proband, and that pedigree was drawn, and our family was sequenced and found to be affected by Li-Fraumeni syndrome. And I went back to school to learn a little more about this and got my PhD and graduated in 2011. And then this video came out. I was asked to do a video to talk about my family story from a few folks at Ohio State that I actually shared my family story with. And they promised me about 20 people might see this little TED type talk. It was called BrutX instead of TEDx because it was Ohio State, Brutus the Buckeye kind of thing. And nonetheless, I had no idea they were actually videotaping it. And then somehow it got out into the Li-Fraumeni group and viral online, and the rest is history. And then I get a phone call from Li-Fraumeni, and that was a little weird. So it was also awesome. So here I am today to share some of my story with you and some of what I believe is research that we could be doing, and to challenge some of the researchers in the room to think a little differently in how we can be looking at modifiable lifestyle behaviors while we're also looking at the genetic components. I think a very important point. So we do know there are causes of cancers of which 5 to 10% is genetic. Now, I'd like to say all the mutants here are in the lucky few, because you're that 5 to 10% of the pie, but 90% is environmental. And I want to make sure that we understand that these two intermix and overlap, and there's an intimate relationship between nutrition and genetics, and we can't discount either one of them. So all of them must be studied to help us to solve some of these issues and to help families affected. So of the environmental components, see if I can get, of the environmental components, you can see the pie chart on the bottom right shows that diet and what we eat accounts for about 30 to 35%. Now that is cancer specific. So for colorectal cancers, that number has been as high as 70 to 75%. So 30 to 35 is a mean. Now you can also see that alcohol, obesity, tobacco, these all make up a huge proportion of that environmental influences, so we must not take those for granted either. There's been a huge shift in the U.S. deaths in the last century. You see what used to be on the left-hand side in the 1900s. Many of the deaths occurred in the U.S. because of infectious disease. And now you can see on the shift to the right-hand graph that many of them are in fact environmentally driven, mostly by obesity. So we've gone from, again, doing a great job in research and really putting an end to some of this infectious disease, but we have a whole lot of work and more research to be done in this environmental area and also in prevention of disease. So here you can see the average years of life lost due to obesity. And at the bottom is body mass index. Now, body mass index, you probably all are well aware of that. And here, what your little number is every time you go into the physician. And you can see the body mass index rises across the bottom x-axis. And on the left side, you can see the estimated years lost specifically due to obesity. So these are deaths, all-cause mortality, that are directly related to obesity. So for instance, if you have a body mass index of way to the right, the over 46, they estimate that you will live 12 years less than someone who has a normal BMI. So, we've seen changes in phenotype, as you know, in Western culture, and now it's actually going overseas as well. And that kind of follows some of our environmental factors that are also going overseas. And in Western culture, we have a lot of influences. Our genes aren't changing that quickly with de novo mutations, with point mutations, with all these SNPs. They're not changing that quickly, but something's going on that's changing our phenotype to be one more obesogenic. And you can see some of the variables that have been studied, not nearly enough around the outside, and I'm going to focus mostly on diet today. I'm a dietitian, and also on physical activity, but there's many, many more that I hope to get you to think about as well, and some of those are listed here. Now, this quote was in a very heavy science article, and I was reading this article, and it hit me like a ton of bricks, because when you think about it, food intake is the one environmental factor to which we are all exposed, necessarily and permanently, from conception to death. So, other than the air we breathe, there is no other environmental component in which we are exposing ourselves on a daily basis, and we need to live. With that in mind, I would challenge people to say, how can we think about survival or our health or our disease without thinking about nutrition and some of these modifiable lifestyle behaviors? Now, of course, you all probably got the glucose coma because, the dietitian always gets the after lunch spot. And I'm okay with that. Stand up if you need to. But, again, you just ate a hearty lunch. And I'm not here to bash anybody's hearty lunch. It looked to me to be pretty healthy. But for the most part, we need to be considering these kind of things. Genetics, of course, but not just genetics. This is something you guys can control. So when we look at the whole U.S., everybody's doing terribly. U.S. is getting a failing grade for health behaviors. Now, I'm going to go through a couple studies relatively quickly, and the researchers can look them up, or you all can look them up. They're all cited. But I just want to show you that what I'm saying actually has proof and evidence behind it. I don't get that from my family. I'm the food Nazi, of course, and I think they think I make most of the stuff up, so they need to pay attention as well. So this one was a behavioral risk factor survey over 400,000 adults, and they took 5 key behaviors, and what they found of these key behaviors that were seen as, low-risk behaviors, good, healthy, but low risk for disease behaviors, only 6% met all of these behaviors. I won't ask you to raise your hand, but I want you to ask yourself, would you have met how many of these behaviors? And I will say that women, Asians, and seniors did the best in terms of meeting these behaviors on the whole. But you can see only 8% engaged in 1, 24% in 2. We've got some work to do. We've definitely got some work to do. So this is another study that shows, this was a landmark study in 2003 by Cali, and it was the first one to come out and directly link body mass index with cancer mortality. And you can see that this is a relative risk kind of slide, and on the right-hand side I summarized it, and basically what you need to know is that this series of looking at the different types of cancers in all the studies showed that cancer deaths attributed to high body weight, BMI, could be, the deaths were attributed 20% for women and 14% for men. So again, body mass index here seems to matter. Now this is very interesting, and I want you to bear with me for a moment. So this is a new set of studies that are coming out that I find very interesting and perplexing. So what we know about cancer is that cancer predisposition and cancer risk is much greater for those that have higher BMIs or higher body fat, body composition with more adipose. for developing the cancer. Yet what we are finding is that once someone has cancer, those with a higher BMI, classified in overweight or even low obesity, actually survive longer. Now, they're trying to figure out why this is, and Betty Kahn is really driving this kind of initiative and has some published research getting ready to come out about this. But it's interesting to me because I'm wondering if it's body fat at all. I really believe that, yes, body fat and adiposity drives getting the initiation and progression of the carcinogenesis, but once somebody has it, it appears to me in the reading I've done that it actually is people with more lean body mass, with more muscle mass, actually are faring better. So those people who are even more overweight during their treatment have more muscle mass because they're carrying around more body weight than a real thin person. You following? And there's something going on with that muscle that seems to confer a protective advantage over those during treatment, okay? So see, it's not all doom and gloom, right? Right. There's also this category now, this is a brand new study, called normal weight obesity. And we have always used BMI as the standard, I will certainly say not the gold standard, for classifying someone in these World Health Organization categories of you are underweight, you're overweight, you're obese, blah, blah, blah. And that's just a simple function of body weight and height. And the reason we do that, it's non-invasive, of course, and it's cheap. And we can do it quickly, and a lot of them. So this study is from the NHANES data, which is a public access national database, over 40,000 adults. And what they did was they took BMIs and then they stratified it according to cardiometabolic risk factors. So their blood factors that they also had. Now it's cross-sectional, so it's a snapshot in time, and that's a limitation. However, they found that there were 50% of the 50% overweight and 30% obese classified only by BMI standards, those people were actually cardiometabolic healthy, meaning they were overweight by our standards and maybe what your physician's telling you, but they actually were healthy and had a healthy profile. Then you look at the next line of the results, and 30% that were classified as BMI normal weight were actually cardiometabolic unhealthy. So we have this huge group of people to the tune of over 74 million in the US predicted, based upon this study, that are not classified in the right category when you're looking at indices of health, biomarkers of health versus weight only. And I think that's a big deal. I think that's a very big deal. So, this is also a big deal. This shows us what we're eating. So in the US, the My Plate is US dietary guidelines recommendations for what we should be eating based upon scientific evidence and tweaked a little by the government. So what we should be eating is a primarily plant-based diet. And I like to talk about whole foods and dietary patterns over time. And most people are the way they are sitting today. Now I want to take out the cancer part, but phenotypically you are what you are today because of a lot of years of dietary patterns, physical activity patterns, habits that you instilled over time, maybe your culture. There's a lot of environmental influences that impact your phenotype today. But looking at this chart, we're not doing very well, again, a failing grade in the dietary thing. Now, processed foods should not account for 63% of what the U.S. is currently eating. And these are highly processed foods. I don't want to demonize all processed foods. And it's important we don't. Highly processed foods are foods that contain a lot of, extra saturated fats, a lot of sodium, refined sugars, that type of thing. If you cut a potato, that's a processed food by definition. I want to keep my food scientists happy in the crowd because dietitians get yelled at for demonizing processed foods. And they also, foods are processed, and there are ways that help us with food safety as well. So we want to be careful about that. What we need to see in that yellow is plant-based foods. And this includes whole grains, fruits, vegetables, plant-based proteins. That's what we need to see on every plate you're looking at. 60 to 75% should be that. That then becomes a dietary pattern that we know to be healthful. So what now? I'd like to say with what we know and where we're at, the U.S. needs to take control back. We are doing horrifically in a lot of our behaviors, and that's why we're seeing that phenotype, that our genes aren't changing, but we're getting more and more obese, and that's an obesity epidemic, clearly. We need to stay educated, and I'm singing to the choir because I love the fact that we have survivors here. We have patients who are currently undergoing. We have newly diagnosed LFS patients here. We have researchers, physicians. I love this. And change what you can. You know, there's something to be said for quality of life, too. So you don't want to do something that you're not willing to do. And that's not going to stick. It's not going to be a dietary pattern. So a dietary pattern or physical activity pattern means what can I do that I'm going to stick with? And we'll talk more about that. The goal is never to say I'm not going to get cancer, because we haven't figured out a way to totally prevent cancer, especially in those who have a genetic mutation. However, we can certainly, I believe, delay the onset. So I can't tell you how many times people come to me and they found out they're diagnosed with cancer, and they've been in that 6% really adhering to all the guidelines, and they're like, listen, lady, I've exercised, I've done what you told me, I got cancer, what? You know? And I have to look at them and think, it's not all for naught. I bet had you not done those things, you would have had cancer 10 years earlier, and you wouldn't be responding as well as you are to treatment right now. And, you know, you wouldn't, the cancer is not progressing as quickly as they expected you to. So those are the types of things that it's hard to say when you can't prove it with the evidence, because we don't have enough of these studies to show this. But the fact is, I believe and would argue that it did matter that you were able to adhere to those evidence-based guidelines. Now, I put up a picture of Otto Warburg here because yesterday I was writing a crazy manuscript, and it was due, but my sister was snapshotting me all this stuff, so I felt like I was here in spirit the entire day. It was awesome. And I saw somebody talked about Otto Warburg. And I will tell you, when I was getting my PhD, I had this picture of Otto right next to my desk, because I was like, there is something about this glycolysis, and you know, I know there's something going on here with this. And I can't tell you how many people asked me if this was my husband. And I'm like, no, that'd be Otto Warburg, you know? So I had to put up the picture today for fun. Okay, so to help all of you, like, what does it mean, all these recommendations? Emily mentioned earlier, the American Institute for Cancer Research does an excellent job. Of course, there's recommendations from the American Cancer Society, from NCCN, all the different organizations. But the American Institute for Cancer Research does a great job at patient advocacy. So for instance, if you're concerned about soy and breast cancer, you can go to their website and sign up, and you can get to a thing called Cancer Fighting Foods. And they will tell you the current recommendations, global recommendations for everything you want to know. And they will even dig through and back you up to the papers that they use to actually grade it. So they've done a great job. So I encourage everybody here to go to that. They now are doing, on the left-hand side, what you're seeing is what they called the Green Bible when I was in school, because I carried it everywhere I went. And in the middle now, they're doing a continuous update projects. And annually, they put out new recommendations. And they have great infographics. So I really recommend patients who just feel like you don't know what to do to get on this website and get involved with the AICR. They do a great job. And on the right, you will see their current recommendations, from everything for physical activity to sodium intake to body fat. So if you don't know what to do, this is a great place to start. Again, don't start all of these tomorrow. Pick a few that you can make a new pattern and stick with it. Pick something that you feel you can be successful with. Now, I know you're never going to be able to read this, so I'm going to help you here. This is one of AICR's publications they put out, and you can get to this online. And on the left-hand side, you will see a bunch of dietary phytochemical components, vitamins and minerals. Across the top, you'll see specific cancers by site. And then you see at the bottom left, there's a key. And the keys show you things that show, with all the evidence, that these experts across the globe come together in London once a year, and they grade all of the studies, and they give these studies a grade, and then come up with, is this convincing evidence that it works? Is it evidence that will decrease or increase cancer risk? These are the types of things they do. And I've pointed out two of them here. The big red arrow is pointing to colorectal cancer at the top, and over at the left, it has to do with eating red and processed meats. Because, red and processed meats with large amounts of for colorectal cancer with heterocyclic amines and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and how they're sometimes cooked at high temperatures, are known to be carcinogenic. And the World Health Organization had put out a statement about that this year. And so you can see for colorectal cancer, and that's what the World Health Organization also said, that they're saying probably steer clear of that high-cooked meat with the char broiling on it, and red meats and all that kind of thing, and processed meats. The green, though, however, is physical activity, saying there is convincing evidence for colorectal cancer that physical activity matters, and it is helpful. So the nice part about this is you all can get online and get to this and really dig into what we know currently about the cancers that you are dealing with and what you know to be convincing evidence versus not. Now, Emily had shown you this slide, and again, our lab ran this, and it's how many people are meeting these recommendations, and you can see not a whole lot. It's not very good. And when over 90% are not meeting the evidence, and over 30% of cancer we know to be diet-related, I have to think we should be paying a little bit more attention to that. And it's something you can do. So here's an EPIC study, and EPIC stands for the European Perspective Investigation into Cancer Nutrition. Over 500,000 adults are studied and prospectively followed now for about 15 years, 10 countries, European countries. And we get a wealth of information about diet and physical activity from this cohort. And they're fabulous studies if people want to delve into that. But you can see the conclusion of this specific study, which was looking at different lifestyle behaviors and scored people according to were they following the American Institute for Cancer Research evidence-based guidelines. And they got a score for everything they were following. So the highest score here was 6 or 7, meaning for male or female, and then a 1 or 0 if they weren't following any of them. And the conclusion boxed at the bottom shows us clearly that the results of the study suggest that following these recommendations that you just saw on a previous slide significantly increases longevity and decreases all-cause mortality. Now, this is a study that just came out as well. That is a cohort of over 135,000, and they also watched people over a decade, and they reported diet, exercise, and various lifestyle behaviors. And these charts are broken down, I know again hard to see, by different cancer sites again. And you can see that it's based upon the US population, and then it's based upon those that were categorized as having high-risk health behaviors and low-risk health behaviors. The take-home message, again, for this study was that 20 to 40% of cancer cases and up to 50% of cancer deaths could be prevented if individuals adopted healthier lifestyle patterns, okay? And this is big stuff. These are big numbers, big numbers. Now, this study is interesting because it's a diabetes study, a diabetes prevention study, and many of you may or may not know about the diabetes prevention program, but it's a lifestyle program that's been very successful in preventing diabetes and grabbing people when they're diagnosed with prediabetes and helping them to change their dietary lifestyles and physical activity lifestyles, and then they never get to that type 2 diabetes. So it's way easier to prevent it and get it earlier, just like it is with cancer, to get it in surveillance early and deal with it than much later. And what they had were 3 cohorts here. They had a lifestyle intervention cohort that were taught low-fat food, low-calorie diet, 15 minutes of moderate intensity activity a day. Not too bad, 15 minutes a day. They had a metformin group and a placebo group. And what they found that the lifestyle group actually outperformed metformin and, of course, the placebo group. So this is, to me, fascinating. This says lifestyle is medicine, right? We've always heard, Hippocrates says, food is medicine. Let food be thy medicine and thy medicine be thy food, right? Well, here we have lifestyle that is actually outperforming pharmaceuticals here. Amazing. Now, you've seen many folks talk about systemic inflammation and how one of the molecular markers of cancers and drivers of carcinogenesis is inflammation. And we now have studies to show us that diet directly modulates inflammation. I can talk the pathways later with any of the researchers who want to, but I'm going to stick with the program here with our families that are here. So we know that there are anti-inflammatory dietary patterns. I want to say patterns because I hate to call out any food, and this gives you an idea of some of them. And then there's also pro-inflammatory dietary patterns. So the goal would be to reduce systemic inflammation in any way you can, right? So if you can have a dietary intake and engage in moderate physical activity and do these types of things to reduce the level of inflammation, that's another way that you can help, hopefully, to control that cancer wanting and the oncogenes wanting to drive themselves, right? So in terms of the anti-inflammatory, many of these foods will look similar to you. They're clearly plant-based, right? And they're also a lot of what we hear about the Mediterranean diet. And there is now a U.S. Dietary Inflammatory Index list where they are categorizing every food and actually giving it an inflammatory index, and Steck is the researcher doing most of that work. Now, we also know there's a dose response between produce, so fruit and vegetable consumption, and all-risk mortality. And this is very important because the bottom line here is for every extra serving you have of fruit and vegetables, you can decrease your risk, this dose response study shows, by 5%. So think back to yesterday. How many of you had probably 5 to 7 servings of fruits and vegetables? Don't raise your hand, because I'm not here to judge. You know? And think about what you eat over the course of a month. How many of you probably have anti-inflammatory produce, 5 to 7 servings per day? And you guys are probably doing a little better than most of the people we see out there and the rest of those we know, and Haynes tells us, right? So this is important. We also know that there's greater survival after breast cancer in physically active women who also consume high produce intakes. This just sets up the study, but just to know, it was in breast cancer, over 1,500. It was the Wells study, and they were followed 5 to 11 years. And I wanted to show you this chart, and on the bottom, you can see the diet and exercise categories across the x-axis that shows low vegetables and fruits and low physical activity in the yellow. Okay, and it's percent mortality on the y-axis. So if you continue to look, it's non-obese is in the blue, obese is in the yellow, and you can see that across the board for the first 3, in terms of the diet and exercise categories, that obese folks had a higher, that's not shocking, higher mortality. But look at the very right one and that significant drop for both categories. These were breast cancer survivors who incorporated high fruits and vegetables and high levels of physical activity. And look at that significant drop in mortality, percent mortality. Astounding. Again, a busy slide, but just more evidence to show here. This shows that leisure time physical activity and the risk of 26 different types of cancer in over 1.4 million adults. And what you can see here is the cancers are down the left, and all of those little dots that are to the left of the line are showing you that they have a lower risk, relative risk, okay, of, this is a hazard ratio, so it's showing death. Okay? So again, physical activity matters. Exercise matters. Muscle mass matters. This one's interesting, and a lot of studies show this, but I just kind of like this chart. It actually shows the average sitting time, and as I'm looking at everyone sitting, I apologize. And it's actually showing a dose response with physical activity related to time sitting per day and sitting patterns over time per day. And there is a direct correlation between those who sit more and those who die more. Now, sadly, we've always used METs, metabolic equivalents, to categorize physical activity. They now have a new one because sedentary apparently wasn't low enough for the Americans. We now have a super sedentary category. Seriously. I've seen my boys in this, like last night at the basketball game. It's like this trance state of you are just not even killing a calorie, and you're just, hello, and they hear like Saturday night, new curtains. honey, so my point is that we now have a super sedentary category because screen time is out going crazy. So sedentary isn't even low enough. Once they do metabolic equivalents and do metabolic testing on folks, that they can't, where we use those to estimate people's metabolic rates and how many calories they burn a day aren't even low enough. So it's frightening, quite frankly. Now, identical twin studies have taught us a ton, and I know there's, I think, one set of LFS identical twins. If you know more, get them to the folks. Get them to the researchers at NCI, please. Every single picture here individually, so the folks, the rabbit, the mice, little Otto and Ewald down there, that is not Otto Warburg, it's another Otto. They are all identical twins, so genetically each one of these pictures and their little friend in the picture is an identical twin. So their phenotypes are very different. Genetically, they are absolutely identical. The Himalayan rabbits, the only difference at their phenotype was they were raised in different temperatures. I'm going to talk a little more about my friends, the agouti mice, because those are incredible landmark studies in terms of methylation and epigenetics. Identical twin sisters there in the bottom right. You can see our guys Otto and Ewald, probably, Ewald gets to the gym a little more than Otto. And then, interesting enough, the ones on the top, you've got identical twins, and that one looks to be about 2 inches taller than the other one. Now, perhaps she is wearing heels. I don't know that. So, going from genotype to phenotype, we have a lot of questions to answer as well. And what you see here are methylation studies, and you are seeing chromosomes on the left-hand side of 3-year-old twins. Chromosomes lined up together, and on the right-hand side, they're 50-year-old twins. And where you see that those chromosomes are yellow is where they're the same in terms of methylation, okay, epigenetics. Where you see on the right they're red, those twins are different. So clearly when they're younger there, and they've had less environmental exposures, they are still looking epigenetically about the same. And let me back up, because I'm not sure if anyone explained epigenetics to y'all. And epigenetics is above, epi means above or on top of. Epigenetics is something going on above the genes. Dr. Malkin mentioned it as a protective mechanism. I think of it as you have your genetic code and your nucleotides all lined up, and these are like little flags of different kind of compounds. And what they do is they're like light switches. They can turn genes on like a light switch or turn them off. Okay, so they're either expressed or they're silenced. And this is what these little flags, these compounds can do. So here, my point is, you have these 3-year-old twins that are looking a lot the same. Both identical twins with their nucleotide sequence, but also epigenetically they're looking the same in terms of methylation here. But on the right, they're way different. Something's going on that their triggers are different on those two ladies on the right. So again, these agouti studies are so landmark. And you can see on the cartoon on the right top that what they've shown is there's an obese, mammals have this agouti gene in it. And agouti also stands for yellow, and they're yellow-coated. And unmethylated agouti mice end up being born yellow, obese, a yellow coat, obese, and therefore much higher rates of obesity-related diseases like cancer, like diabetes, like cardiovascular disease and stroke. When you take the identical twin and give it methylation, when you expose it to highly methyl donors is what we call it, and guess what a methyl donor is? We have bioactive foods that are methyl donors like folate. When you give it vitamins and minerals that it needs, it actually turns the light switch off. It silences the gene for obesity, for the yellow coat, and therefore obesity-related diseases like cancer. Does that make sense? Okay. So the bioactive food here you'll see, again, was folate for this first one. They've also done it with soy in these mice. The next study they did was take moms, and in utero, what they did was they took the control group and they gave the moms, exposed them to BPA, which is bisphenol A, which is a known carcinogen in large doses. You see the non-BPA bottles anymore and that type of thing, right? For baby bottles and interlining of cans and those types of things. So they exposed both groups. Yet the experimental group, they also gave those moms methyl donors. And the methyl donors they gave, you see here, either vitamin B12 or folic acid. They also did it with genistein, which is one of the compounds, isoflavones, found in soy, in whole foods, okay? And you can see the difference. So these epigenetic switches, we know often come from bioactive food components. And you can see down the left-hand side some of the nutrients that we know. Some are related to soy, resveratrol you've probably heard of. In red wine, don't we love that, right? It's also in grapes, by the way, if you don't drink. Different vitamins, minerals, and phytochemicals. And in the middle, it tells you some of the food origins. And again, you'll look and see that most of those are plant-based food origins. And to the right, it actually tells you the epigenetic role. So we can have genetic switches going on, not just with methylation. DNA methylation, there are 12 different kinds that can do this, but also with acetylation, with histone modifications. So there's many ways in which epigenetically, we are turning switches off and on all day long, despite our genetic code. Now, who remembers Gene the Dancing Machine? Seriously, raise your hand for this one. Who remembers Gene the Dancing Machine? Oh my gosh, I thought it would be like everybody. Apparently, I had a lot of more screen time than you guys did growing up. So you remember who remembers the Gong Show? All right, Gene was the guy who would come out and practice and do this thing. So I put this up here just to say, at this point, genes are messy. Genes are messy. And now we have this thing called epigenetics on top of that. And bioactive food components and exercise and all these environmental things. It's just messy. Gene was kind of a messy dancer. I'm not going to lie. Look him up later online. But anyway, so it's just all messy. And I'm going to show you some other ways that it's messy. So even if you have a P53 mutation, we all got thousands of SNPs going on in our body all the time that could be changing things and how we are regulating things. So if somebody responds to metformin and somebody doesn't, maybe they don't have the active enzyme needed to make that biologically active. We have that with tamoxifen all the time. Some people are hyper metabolizers of medication as well and don't need as much. So these are all things that we need to be better about assessing people to make sure we're giving them the right prescriptions. So check this out. Hypercholesterolemia. ApoE gene is actually the gene that encodes for the protein called apolipoprotein E, which actually forms lipoproteins. And these are the little things that shuttle out cholesterol and all that from the body. Okay, very important. There are many variants. We have 3 different variants of this that are common. E3 is very common in the humans that we know who have been tested. The point is they each respond differently based upon their variation of this one gene to different things. So for instance, if I know as a dietitian somebody has the allele variant of E2, and I tell all of them, go have a low-fat diet and get rid of your low LDL diet. Guess what? E2 is only minimally responsive to that dietary prescription. So why make their life miserable, right? Yet, if they have the E4 variant, they are very highly resistant to a low-fat and LDL diet. If somebody is E2, they are responsive to, I would then focus on maybe helping them to get more soluble fibers in combination with LDLs. Exercise. E2 is responsive to exercise, but only endurance exercise. So see, this field of nutritional genomics is going to be where we can actually sequence somebody and tell them their prescriptions with some degree of certainty, hopefully, if we can figure out the bioinformatics of it all and the statistics, that, here's what you need to do based upon your profile. You need to exercise, but you know what? Based upon your risk factors and your genetic makeup, I'm going to recommend endurance exercise because you're not going to respond as well to high-intensity exercise. Wouldn't that be awesome? I mean, clearly George Burns, who knows George Burns? Oh my gosh, half my students don't know George Burns anymore. Clearly he didn't have the, bad SNP. He had a protective SNP somewhere for, that man smoked cigars 24/7 till he was, what did he die, 90 or 100? I mean, he was up there. So the point is, we need to start to stratify and know this stuff about LFS, the only way we're going to do it is if we prospectively follow people in terms of their environmental exposures, not just their genetic exposures, right? That's how you find out what's going on, and we can classify what works and what didn't. Now, we know that P53 on a molecular level clearly can turn the switches up and down for each one of these things, okay, if it's working properly and not dysfunctional. I would challenge that bioactive food components can do the same, and in cancer we've proven in every one of these molecular switches that bioactive food components have had an impact and do work. Here's a chart. Tells you on the left-hand side the classes of the different bioactive food components, and this was a 1990 chart. We've come whirlwind since then. And down the middle, it'll show you the bioactive component listed, and again, those dietary sources, no big surprise, plant-based. And again, I'm not a vegetarian or a vegan myself, but I'm saying dietary patterns over time matter. Physical activity pattern times over time do matter. If you can get those two together, golden. So I want to mention phytochemicals, and again, we mentioned it earlier with the Garden of Hope presentation as well. So phytochemicals are chemical compounds in food that give it its color, its flavor. When you think about biting into garlic and that pungent taste, or an onion, or you think about cruciferous vegetables and how bitter they are, those are phytochemicals. And these phytochemicals, we know for a fact, confer anti-cancer properties, and they're found in plants. And the way plants use them is plants use them as protective mechanisms for themselves. So these are the bitter tastes that keep the animals from eating the plants. And these are the pigments in tissues of the plants that protect it from the UV rays. So we have found in research in our labs and in others that when people consume these phytochemical-rich plants, we then confer those same benefits. Okay? So even carotenoids in the skin can actually help to protect us from ultraviolet rays. Don't eat too much because you turn orange and it's not attractive. So the point is here, this shows how we know along the whole continuum how these phytochemicals are working, and you guys should be jazzed up about this. This is food. This is food you have access to, not a medication or something. You can do this. This shows you, I know it's really bright and crazy, but it actually shows you the different kinds of foods that are high in phytochemicals. So if you start to think about, this is the whole push behind Eat the Rainbow, right? Eat the different foods, you're exposing yourself to all the different ones. I have a little black raspberry there on the left-hand side because we do a lot of studies at Ohio State in black raspberries. One black raspberry has over 4,000 phytochemicals. We've run it, we know. Over 4,000 in one black raspberry, right? Amazing. So why are we taking one out and putting it in a pill? Eat the black raspberry. Eat the black raspberry. I beg of you. This is a chart that shows the phytochemicals, and it shows, we've talked about carotenoids today, but it shows the different ones, and my point here is showing that we haven't even begun to scratch the surface. I just told you that a black raspberry has over 4,000 phytochemicals. We've studied, even in carotenoids, maybe 10. And part of the reason is people don't like to fund research on whole foods because they want to know the actual component that changed the molecular pathway. And I don't care if it changes someone's health, right? And I want them to eat whole foods because that's what we're exposed to. So researchers were our own worst enemies in review boards because we don't like to fund whole food research because we want to know, was it the pineapple or was it the... And I say, if you give me enough money, I will tell you the molecular mechanism, I'll tell you how it changed the microbiome, I'll tell you everything you want to know, right? So again, we haven't scratched the surface and we need to be. These are some of the studies I've been involved with at Ohio State. Because we're a land grant, we truly do crop to clinic to community research, and we are creating now functional foods. So we know, for instance, you can see right in the middle, there's a tomato soy juice, little can, looks like a V8 there. Those we know for prostate cancer, for instance, studies have shown us that lycopene is helpful in prostate cancer. And the American Cancer Society in that big chart has lycopene as preventive, convincingly preventive. We know that soy for men with prostate cancer, because a lot of them are trying to reduce their androgens, so soy is helpful for them. And what we did at Ohio State was grow high lycopene-rich tomatoes, put it in a can, went through 5 excruciating years of me tasting this stuff until it was palatable, and all these tests, got it out there, put it through clinical trial, and in fact showed that a can to 2 of this a day in clinical trials decreased PSA and the progression of prostate cancer. So the point is, if we can get better at identifying real whole foods and actually getting those out there. Our dog and cat foods are doing this years before us, like no hairball food and indoor formula. If we can start to take the best of the best and packaging it, that it's not a supplement and it's not a vitamin, but it's whole foods packaged together. Soy almond bread, for instance. We did a pretzel study and we wanted snacks for women who were overweight and at risk for high metabolic syndrome. Just finished that, changed their blood levels. It was fabulous, just by giving them a better snack option, okay, that we knew would be better than just grabbing a pretzel off the shelf. Here we concocted the pretzels that we knew were going to decrease their triglyceride levels and all that. So again, growing hope for cancer survivors is another way in which we're bringing survivors to a place where it's an urban oasis so they can get away from the chaos of cancer and they can come to a place and harvest fresh produce, and they're getting some physical activity. My goal, I talked to our farm manager, I said, my goal is to have the soccer field next to the garden, right? And we can do these types of things so where you can have physical activity and harvesting and go home and cook those foods. And we bring in a chef from the medical center who creates recipes that are all AICR approved and wonderful. So I wanted to show you some more results. Emily gave you a snapshot. Here we're showing that we, in a 6-month period, had significant improvements in many of the different parts of the healthy eating index. We improved, of course, fruit consumption, produce consumption, she showed you. Fatty acids went down. We had empty calories reduced. So we are changing people's dietary pattern for the better. Here's a chart, and again, the scientists will know these are just bar graphs, and what you can see is we had significant, in a 6-month period, just by exposing people, not telling them to go on a diet, I don't believe in that. We exposed them to this garden. They decreased their body mass index significantly, their weight, their waist circumference, systolic blood pressure, total cholesterol, and triglycerides. This is astounding results when you had significance for 29 cancer survivors. And I'm telling you, it's a great thing as a researcher when they beg to come back every year. And we actually caught people sneaking in our 2nd year, and we said, you've already done this. They're like, we want to do it again. I'm like, well, you can't. So that's a good thing when they're sneaking in your studies, right? So the point being that we know that there are cardiometabolic indices that are very important, and also we also know that cholesterol is driving some of this cancer now and some LDL particles, and I don't want to get into that too much, but to say that if we can give people a healthier profile overall, they're more equipped to fight the bigger battles when comes time. Now, I also want to take a moment just to mention a surveillance project that's going on at Ohio State in Lynch syndrome. And Heather Hampel isn't here, but in the back we have one of our other genetic counselors who knows about this. This is called the Ohio Colorectal Cancer Prevention Initiative. And the main goal was to use statewide resources. And for everyone who got diagnosed with cancer, colon cancer, they were going to have surveillance and get sequenced. Because 3% of them are typically have Lynch syndrome, and then they were going to go after the families and get them screened. So much like what's going on in Li-Fraumeni. But the reason I love this study is because it was statewide. And we have 88 counties in Franklin, Ohio, and they are in hospitals, community hospitals doing this, in over 80 of those. And the fact that is so amazing to me is because we are reaching health disparate individuals with this study. You know, they can come to the big cancer centers, and that's where we get them, and I get all that. But we are missing so many people who don't have the resources and are treated at community hospitals that aren't in these huge databases, right? And I love the fact that we also included a environmental impact lifestyle survey. So the first time they come in and they're sequenced, they give me that information I want about what supplements are you taking, and are you taking aspirin, and what are you eating, and how are you exercising? And we can now prospectively follow them. And there's no reason we can't do the same with Li-Fraumeni, and we should be. So, I'm going to wrap it up here and take questions if I have time, but I want to say, again, think about changing patterns. Michael Pollan, who I don't agree with everything he says, but I do agree with this, absolutely. Eat food, not too much, and mostly plants. Just move more. You know, I know we throw the recommendations at you. I'd love if you exercise 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. If you want to lose weight, 60. If you want to lose more weight, 120. At what intensity? Like, who cares? Just move more. If you're sitting, moving more means standing more. Getting up every 15 minutes or something. Just move more. That's better than yesterday's pattern, okay? Drink more, preferably water. All right? Drink more water. I don't care what kind of water. Just drink more water. We make things so complicated. I don't really like water that much, so I put in like a little ginger, like ginger root, cut it up, stick that in there. Make your own fun stuff. That gives me some of that spice. I know that's a good ginger, all that kind of stuff in the water is good too. Don't inhale. Stay away from e-cigarettes, tobacco. Don't inhale stupid stuff. That's no good for you, right? It seems so crazy, but I get people calling me. You wouldn't believe it. Don't inhale. Sleep more. Take naps. If everybody, I believe, took a nap a day and one piece of dark chocolate, we'd have world peace. There's my message. Should run for president, right? Okay, but sleep more. Get a nap. Who cares? I tell my boss at work, I'm putting a couch in my office. I'm taking a nap. She's like, okay, if you're not fussy, take a nap, please. Laugh more. You guys are good about that. I will say, I'm on Facebook, and I see, and the mutants know how to laugh at themselves. The rest of us don't so much. I got this whole brooch story this morning. I'm picking up my sister, and I'm in this white suit that I don't do well in white suits because I'm just like I'm the bull in the candy shop kind of China shop. And I spill coffee right here, right away. So I pick her up, and I'm like, got the Tide pen going. I'm like, oh. And I'm thinking, I'm going to a bunch of cancer survivors talking to them. My God, what they've been through. Who cares about a little coffee on my white suit? Really? And then anyway, my sister pulled this off her purse and gave it to me as a brooch. I'm not giving it back. It's so beautiful. But laugh more. I don't like this whole mindful thing. I'm one of these dietitians who will say it. I hate it. I got too much in my mind. I got a full enough mind. I don't need more mindful stuff. I need mindless stuff. I need people to make the better choice the easier choice. And there's a great book, Thin by Design, by Brian Wansek, and he tells you how to do this. And it is easy to read. He's been studying 25 years. Like, for instance, if I walk in someone's house, or if he does, he has, and there's a box of cereal visible. I don't care if it's like Wheaties or if it's Captain Crunch. I don't care. That family is 23% more likely to be obese than a family that doesn't have a box of cereal somewhere visible. He tells you where you sit in a restaurant, predicts all his studies what you're going to eat. And I'm telling you, it worked. I thought where my family eats, at a sports bar, and it was exactly what we ordered. It is amazing to read this kind of stuff. So again, try to create an environment that for you is going to promote a healthier you. Right? If you need a little spiritual time or time to yourself, I say go take a prayer walk or whatever you want to call it, at work or whatever. Go walk 15 minutes a day and just have it yourself. Fit it into your world so it becomes a pattern. Forgive more, mostly yourself. Everybody has this big guilt thing. Understand, I know I'm hammering it in, dietary patterns, physical activity patterns, lifestyle patterns. It means if you screw up on the weekend, who cares? If 5 days a week you're doing pretty good, then you're doing pretty good. Forgive yourself and get back on the train. Tomorrow's always another day to do a little better. It's okay. Because I maintain that it's the stress we put ourselves through that causes more of the inflammatory response than most of the stuff we do. So give yourself permission. It's okay. And control what you can, release the rest. And I love this. Like, life is tough, my darling, but, so are you. Because you guys, man, you're my heroes. You're amazing. Okay. This was a little quote to finish up by Michael Fox. We are the hero of our own story. So make your story a good one. Thanks. Do you have time? Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, I think first that's like my most popular question I get no matter where I'm at, so I'm prepared to answer it. Actually, the soy thing in murine models has been shown to not fare so well, especially in hormone-positive type cancers, breast cancer specifically. However, we are not mice, even though they do inform a lot of our research and a lot of our studies. In fact, we actually find almost the opposite to be true in human studies. I have not seen a study with soy positive or negative hormone that has not been at least null, meaning no change versus positive change in humans. And I can refer you to that AICR website where they have rated the soy recommendations, and it'll get you to those exact papers that say that. And you can get videos of the foremost researchers who promote that. So I will tell you, the medical oncologist, Steve Clinton, who I do, was my research mentor. He will tell you that, soy is not to be demonized or feared. It's just physicians fear the liability for, say, go hog wild on soy. And I'm not saying go hog wild on soy at all. I'm saying soy can be a component of a responsible dietary pattern. I hate to demonize anything other than, even though my family still eats bacon, that's the one thing I'm having a hard time fitting in, how I do that. I'm so sorry. Nitrate-free bacon. You're pushing it. In moderation. Everything in moderation, including moderation. Okay.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. I had a question about, you seem to, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed to be that the fruits and the vegetables were in the same, you're linking them together. And I've actually had doctors tell me, cut way back on the fruit because of all the natural sugar in it and how sugar's bad, and I've always kind of been, well, it's natural sugar, it's still, you have the antioxidants, What is your thought on that? High amounts, low amounts, moderation?
I have no opinion. Just kidding. I have opinion about everything. My student's laughing because she knows my take on all these things. But so here's the deal. Let me start with this first. Most physicians in the United States have had, there's only 20% of physicians in the United States who have had one nutrition course, one basic nutrition course. So the physicians mainly, not all of them, and definitely those that do research, I don't want to put in that category because they're up on that, but the ones that do not do research and see patients, that's all fine, but most of their nutrition information comes from Channel 4. So you must be careful. I will tell you that I do lump, because of the phytochemicals and also physiologically in our body, produce under fruits and vegetables, because I've not seen one study that has separated out refined sugars from natural occurring fructose that is in fruit, and the fructose has been bad or a bad thing in fruit. If you take corn syrup fructose and throw it all over your pancakes, we got a problem. But the sugar that you find demonized now is simple sugars, refined sugars that are in highly processed foods. And the reason that came about is because we demonized fat for a while. You remember about 20 years ago, the T-cell diet and all that fat stuff. So what happened was manufacturers respond to what they sell. And manufacturers took out the sugar, and in doing that, they took out the fat, and in doing that, you lose flavor. So what did they add back? Refined sugars and sodium. So then you have a new onslaught of studies that are going, oh my gosh, sugar's bad. Well, it's because we've just exposed the US population to a bunch more sugar and sodium. So again, I've not seen a responsible study where they've been able to stratify that out. I absolutely, and you can see the one dose response study clearly shows there's a dose response decrease in cancer and cancer risk with fruit. Now, if you're eating 40 pieces of fruit a day, at some point that's not such a good thing. Again, a well-balanced diet, think 5 to 7 combination of fruit and vegetable a day is what I'm saying, okay? Anything too little or too much is not a good thing. Other than sleep. Well, too much is a good thing, too little is not. But the point is, we tend to get on something and think an extreme and have tons of it. I get it. We all want the quick fix. But again, it took most of us 30, 40, 50 years to get where we are today. So give it some time. And just start to change little things that you can live with and not go crazy.
I had a question when you were talking about the allele variants, the E2, E3, E4 kind of thing. Is that something that's just now starting to be studied, or is that something where us as the general population can go and be tested and find out kind of what works best for us individually?
Yeah, so you can read, I had that study cited as well, and you could read the specifics on that study. There are just some other areas that are ahead of us in the game, even with measuring salt sensitivity, or I already mentioned tamoxifen and those types of things, where they will sequence people, or it's cheaper to do. There's nobody that's going to do widespread. And really in terms, I teach nutritional genomics at Ohio State, and there's really not, at this point, I don't feel like it's ready for prime time. And I think you've heard that with many of the things here, that we are in this exploratory, we're excited, there's things moving, but it's to the point that we can't say. I would say to you that most people, we use these big epidemiological studies to give our nutritional recommendations. So the first person who comes in the door, and we have to tell our students to do this too, who has hypertension, the first thing doctors say, the first thing dietitians say is what? Decrease your sodium in your food. Like, I don't know about you, but if you've ever been on a really low sodium diet, talk about no quality of life. Like, I've tried it myself. I try to do what I tell people. I'm like, this isn't working. But then I find out that, 15 to 50% of people are salt sensitive and the others are not. So like the George Burns thing and the cancer and the smoking, that's not even going to work for some people. It's just going to make their life miserable, and it's not going to bring it down. So what I would do is try lifestyle behaviors first. And for instance, 80% of type 2 diabetics could get off of all their medication if they got to a desirable body weight and exercised. But a lot of them say, I'm just going to keep taking my medication. That's their choice. That's fine. It's costing a lot of money. But we don't do a good job. I don't know how many of you have actually, your doctors told you to see a registered dietitian. And I'm not talking about nutritionists. That's not the same thing because they're not registered dietitians. They don't have the national exam. Naturopaths aren't. So to be called a nutritionist, y'all can call yourself a nutritionist today and start a practice. I guess you just got to eat is what I'm seeing to be a nutritionist. But what you need is a registered dietitian, and there's some that are certified in oncology, CSOs. And those are the ones who know how to advise on specific things related to cancer. Yeah.
I just wanted to know what your opinion on organic versus regular store-bought. Like the gardens that you're producing, are they organic?
No.
Okay.
So I have no opinion on that, just kidding. No, so here's how I feel about this. There actually was just something released, I won't go to that slide. I had a supplemental slide about this, but actually, here's what I find about organic versus not. So in my garden, because we have cancer survivors, some of them are still in active treatment and immunocompromised. We actually chose not to use organic for 2 reasons. First of all, because most of the organic stuff is manure-based and exposes them to higher risk of foodborne illnesses, and we didn't want to do that, of course. The other thing is I can't afford it. To be certified organic and really do it, and I've got a 3-acre farm. Pardon me? We do. So I will tell you, we do all manual. My niece worked there last year, and she spent hours and hours. We do all manual weeding, but we use nitrogen-based fertilizer to start. I will tell you, there was a beautiful study that just came out. There have been 2 studies that have looked at 40 years of organic versus non-organic or conventional grown, and they found 0 differences in terms of physiological outcomes. There are some minor outcomes, like for instance, organic type milk has higher levels of omega-3 in it. However, that's hardly an omega-3 anyway. We eat fish for omega-3. We don't go to milk for omega-3. I will tell you this. If you can afford organic, go for it. I don't have a problem with that. But most of my clients in the community can't afford organic food, and they got big cancer bills coming in. So I just say eat produce and wash it. I don't care. Most of the time when people ask me this, they're holding like a donut and a Frappuccino going, well, I avoid produce because I don't want a pesticide. I think I do that. Like, oh, okay, how's that Frappuccino? No chemicals there. The other thing is there is higher pesticide levels, I'm in full disclosure, for non-organic foods, but guess what? They are way below the levels that are deemed to be safe, way below. So I say wash your produce, just eat more produce. How's that? I don't care where it's coming from.